Doug Bopst, welcome to the American Glutton Podcast.
Ethan, thanks for having me, man.
Dude, you have a really interesting story, and I just really want to share it with the people who listen to my podcast. But you say going to prison was one of, or if not the best thing that ever happened to you. Please tell me this story.
It was because when I entered my incarceration for felony drug charges, I was heavily addicted to opiates. I was doing hundreds of milligrams of Oxycontin per day. I was selling tons of pot to not only support my habit, but to also make money. I was a convicted felon, like I mentioned. I was hopeless. I was having suicidal thoughts, tons of anxiety. And really, I was just emotionally, spiritually, physically, and mentally broken. But what ended up happening to me was when I entered the gates of the detention center, I cried because I didn't want to go in for obvious reasons. And when I left, I cried because I didn't want to leave.
Yeah,
And
dude, I experienced that a little bit um leaving rehab for the last time, where I was just like, I mean, it's scary because, like, oh my god, I've kind of figured out life within these parameters, within these confines, and with these barriers set up. I can do life really well, and I'm working this program, and then, like, it's like I'm leaving this structure. It's scary, it's bittersweet. There's a lot to leaving something like that.
there is, right? Because as you'll hear in a second, like the only thing that was different for me was different for me, like as far as like staying clean and staying away from drugs and getting my act together, was my cellmate who helped me transform my life. And so when I entered jail, the first thing I had to do was kick opiates cold turkey for the first few weeks, which I'm sure, as you know, and maybe even your listeners know, it's like having the worst case of the flu, like uncontrollable bowel movements, massive aches and pains that you didn't know existed, anxiety, depression, sleepless nights. But the thing that really was transformative for me, as far as like the one of the feelings that you would experience, is like this feeling that you were trying to crawl out of your own skin and you're trying to like leave your body, right? And the reason I say it was transformative is because now, like looking back, I think it was like really God, the universe, whatever you call it, like trying to force the old version of me outside of me so the new me could become whole. And so as I'm detoxing through Oxy, my soon-to-be cellmate is sitting at one of the tables playing Scrabble, and he looks at me. He's like, "Hey, man, what are you doing here?" And then like I kind of gave this very like low tone answer, like, "Hey, I'm just in here because of drugs or whatever." And he was like, "Okay, man." And he could just tell that I was unconfident. I was 50 pounds heavier than I am now. I had low self-esteem, and just my shoulders were rounded forward. Like I said, head was down, didn't talk too loud. And he said to me, he's like, "You're going to start working out with me when you get through your detox." And I looked at him. I was like, "There's no way in hell I'm going to do that." Because at the time, I could have been a model for Pillsbury. I was like, "There's no way." And Eric looked like a more jacked version of Brad Pitt from Fight Club, is how I like to describe him, just to give some context. And later on that day, I saw him, or not too long after that, I saw him work out, and he was doing thousands of push-ups, hundreds of pull-ups, like running all over the common area. I was like, "Who the hell is this guy?" And shortly after that, there was a conversation that happened in the cell that would change my life. And can I cuss on here?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so him and I are talking, and he was asking me more questions about my story. He's like, "Why are you in here?" I'm like, "Well, my parents got divorced and girls rejected me and kids bullied me and I got cut from all these sports teams." And he looks at me, he's like, "Quit being a bitch." And I said to him, like, "What do you mean?" Because in that moment, like I wanted to be coddled and be like, "It's okay, Dougie. Like, the world's against you. Like, it's everybody else's fault." But he's like, "Dude, you're blaming everybody else for your problems but yourself." He was like, "There's plenty of people that were in your circumstances and aren't in jail, right, Doug?" And I'm like, "Yep." He's like, "You chose to get yourself here." He's like, "You have two choices. You can be a man, look yourself in the mirror, and know that it's up to you to change the future of your life. Like, nobody's coming to save you." Or he's like, "You can be a bitch, go cry in the corner and say, 'Woe is me,' and blame everybody else for your problems and feel sorry for yourself." He's like, "Most people will do that." So of course, the last thing I wanted to do was to be a bitch, right? And also, like, I had this like kind of aha moment, because the drugs at that point had been, out of my system, and was starting to get through like a little bit. Like, I had started to get through the days that I was in. And I was like, you know what? Like, I clearly don't have everything figured out. At that point, I was 21 years old. I had 21 jobs. I was in this my own mental health crisis. I was, heavily addicted to drugs before that and selling drugs. So I knew that, like, man, like, clearly what I was doing before wasn't working. Let's try something else. And that inspired me to start working out in jail. And when I started to work out, I could barely hold myself up to do a push-up from my knees, could hardly walk up and down the steps. But with his motivation, training me in there every single day during my 90-day sentence, I was able to do a set of 10 push-ups and run a mile by the time it was all said and done. And it was super transformative to me. I mean, it taught me a lot of things that I needed to learn to be taught, like the importance of self-discipline, like really like following through with the things I said I was going to do. It taught me the importance of, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, because, you and I talked about this on my podcast, but before I went to jail, I couldn't embrace discomfort at all. Anytime I would get stressed, I'd do a drug. Every time I was anxious, I would do a drug. Every time I would, get into a fight with somebody, I would do a drug, whatever it was. And so I wasn't used to dealing with my emotions. And in jail, there's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide. I wasn't the type of person that was going to get into a bunch of fights. So, me running my mouth when I was upset wasn't going to work for me. Obviously access to drugs isn't what it is on the streets in jail. So all these things that prevented me from escaping, where I really had to look myself in the mirror and figure out, how do I deal with these emotions in a healthy way? So that was helpful. And the other thing was just like really establishing this belief in myself that I think it was there. Before, it was just so buried down because of all the stuff that had happened in my life. And obviously a lot of the stuff that I did to myself, that I found that belief in myself again. And it was just very transformative for me to be able to get motivated to finally take the initial steps to start to transform my life. And so the day I left jail, I cried because I didn't want to leave, because, like, again, this guy had come into my life with no skin in the game as far as my life, and chose to really help save my life while I was in jail. And so I said to him, I'm like, how can I ever repay you? And he told me not to mess up and to pay it forward. And he gave me a workout plan that I still have framed in my place today, so I never forget where I came from. Got out, stayed on the path, lost a bunch of weight, became a trainer to help other people transform their lives. And, like, the rest is history. I mean, a lot's happened in between then, but that's really the story of how jail, transformed my life.
Dude, it's so amazing. You said so many things in there that I want to take up. Like, first of all, I think his skin in the game is literally like he's saving his life by saving your life. You know what I mean? Like, that's his skin in the game, is like he has to be responsible for you also, in order for you to be responsible for yourself, to change, to keep him on track, whatever that means. That's like how I'm relating to it. Like, what's your skin in the game today? Your skin in the game today is still saving yourself. That's why you do this, right? Another thing you said is the piece on personal responsibility. There's so many discussions on personal responsibility, and so many people want to talk about nuance and how there are environmental factors, and fine, that's all true, fine. I think that it's perspective. That's all it is. You cannot say objectively that any person has zero responsibility in any situation, right? Objectively, if they're there, they got themselves there somehow. There is some portion that they contributed to. But I think that the more the responsibility needed to progress, to change, is entirely personal. And so, in order to do that, why not just look at everything as, I put myself here? Do you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, you could fucking spend a lot of time sitting around splitting hairs over why McDonald's is partially responsible for your condition. Where does that get you? It gets you nowhere. It does not handle your condition. Your condition is entirely within you to handle. And maybe you need a guy like Eric. Eric is his name, right?
Yeah.
Or someone like you today to start talking about how it was entirely your burden to solve, your burden to fight through, so that another guy can go like, I see that. As long as I'm thinking about what somebody has done to me, I can't get better. You can't move on from that point. If it's somebody else's doing, even if you get hit by a car and you have to do a bunch of physical therapy, the guy whose car hit you, he can't do the physical therapy for you. You have to do the physical therapy. It's up to you to get better. So why not take on the entire burden of responsibility and go, I did all of it. So I am all powerful and I can change whatever the fuck I want. I just think it's like a better position to take charge from, you know?
Absolutely. And I think the moment you give your power away to somebody else or something else, like it's over,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the game over. I think it's hard for people. Again, I'm not justifying that kind of behavior. I think it's hard for people to look themselves in the mirror and understand that there's work that needs to be done when they're in a low place in their life, because their life is already so bad that it's like they don't have the confidence or the level of secureness to look themselves in the mirror and say, you know what, like I got some work I need to do. Because when they're in that place, it's like there's so many other things that are going wrong in their life that the last thing they want to be able to do, the last thing they want to do is to have to say, you know what, there's other things in my life that I need to fix. But you're right. Like the only way out, the only way is to take full responsibility, because nobody's coming to save you. And throughout the course of my life, I was looking for things to save me in healthy and unhealthy ways, right? Like when I was younger, I was looking for substances. I was looking for the validation I got from selling drugs. I was looking for, being able to fit in with certain crowds to come and save me from my own brokenness. And obviously that got me to jail. But even after I got out of jail, I looked for validation from like vanity and like the way I looked, or getting attention from girls, or success, or money, or whatever it was, to save me from like doing the actual work. And it wasn't until I like looked myself in the mirror and said, you know what, like none of this stuff matters. Like none of this stuff matters for your long-term happiness and fulfillment if you're not happy with yourself on the inside, if you're not doing the work. Because while like fitness is important, relationships are important, success is important, all those things they have some level of importance. But when you're using those things to dictate how you feel about yourself, it's a very, very slippery slope. And that's why I've really had to reevaluate, even like the last few years, my relationship with fitness and health. Not that I don't exercise frequently, because I do. I still work out 5-6 days a week, but it got to a place like where I was constantly looking at myself in the mirror to say, okay, like, do I still have my 8-pack? Do I still have my 6-pack? Do I still have all the abs? Like, are my arms getting bigger? Like, how come I don't have as many veins today? Or I'm stepping on the scale and, traveling on airplanes with food. And for me, that became really unhealthy, because I was isolating myself from other people, and I was hiding from the fact that there was still a lot of insecurities inside of me that I needed to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get that. Like my personal physical goals have utterly shifted. Like I still like to have the hint of abs in the right lighting. If I there's in my shower, there's a perfect light, spotlighting, downlighting, right? And if I see myself with no abs in the morning when I'm taking a shower, I'm like, what the hell is going on? This is out of control. But like there's a difference between that and preparing for a photo shoot, which takes like 6 weeks of really, really hard work to get veins to show up in my abdomen. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of thing where it's just like, how do I want to live my life forever? I've lost 300 pounds. Um, if I'm not under or around 10% body fat, that's okay.
Right.
It's okay to not be the leanest version of me that's possible. It's okay to be within the band of quote unquote healthy body fat percentage.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up like getting ready for a photo shoot, because that is totally different than like what
Then
I
life.
was.
That's not
Yeah,
life. Yeah.
yeah. What I was dealing with was like years of this. It wasn't just like a period of months. This was like years of me being afraid of eating anything that wasn't in the typical like bodybuilding physique meal plan. And my logic for this was I was so scared of going back to that version of myself, that who I was before jail, that I was like, all right, if I eat pizza, that's what old fat Doug would do. So does that mean that I'm going to become that person? Or if I eat ice cream, like I'm going to do this. And so I just became so afraid of going back to that old version of myself, that I just stayed away from all that stuff. Plus, I was continuing to chase like the next thing, the next rush with my vanity, because I thought that as a kid, like the things that made me most miserable as a kid were girls picking on me and rejecting me, my weight and how I looked in the mirror, and the fact that I just didn't see myself as successful. So I thought that, well, the opposite must be true. That if I get ripped, I'll get attention and I'll be happy. That if I get attention from girls, I'll be happy. If I have success, I'll be happy. And so I started to get ripped, but I still wasn't happy. So I'm like,
Yeah.
well, maybe I'm just not ripped enough. So then I got to get more ripped and more ripped. And it becomes this lose-lose game, to where you start to realize like, A, you've lied to yourself for years because you've chased this thing that just doesn't exist. Right. And B, it's like, what am I doing? Like, is this really what happiness looks like? Is sitting in my room on a Friday and Saturday night and eating tilapia and broccoli and not going out with my friends, not having a social life? Like, is that what this is supposed to be about? And it took some time, because I had this level of cognitive dissonance that, you know, I know Mark Wahlberg, and I've been told a lot through the years that I look like Mark. And when I first got told that in my like mid 20s or early 20s or whatever, after I lost all the weight, I didn't believe it, or I thought it was an insult, because when I was a kid, I was called all kinds of names. I was told I looked like people that, in my mind weren't attractive. So I was like, I don't look like that. There's no way. Like, there's no way I see it. Yet everybody would tell me that. And I still saw this, like the fat version of me when I looked in the mirror, even though all the weight was gone. I don't know if you can relate to this, but I still saw that person in the mirror. And it wasn't until I started going to like therapy and understanding that that was all kind of normal based on, growing up and then being bullied and picked on. Again, I'm not blaming that for anything. I think that's just the reality of when you're bullied and picked on and you see yourself a certain way, you start to believe that, and your brain just gets hardwired from a young age to see that. Um, and so through therapy, I was able to understand why that was normal. And then that made me feel a little bit better that that was normal. And then I could, work through it through, affirmations, writing down, like literally like what type of person I was before I went to jail, and then writing down who I am now, like really talking to people that I trusted to get their honest opinion on the way I looked. And, over time and doing that work consistently, I started to really shift and see myself as somebody who was a completely different person.
Yeah. I relate to this so much. My cousin recently sent me a picture that one of his, I think his sister posted on Facebook or something, and it's all of us when we were children. So it's like early 80s. And I look at this kid and I'm like, why the fuck would that kid for a second have any body issues? There's not one thing that I could be critical of him for. And it's a picture of myself. And my entire childhood it is plagued with the memory of feeling like I don't fit in, like my body is wrong, like I'm fat, like I'm grotesque. And I look at this kid and I'm like, it's just not true. So I think a lot of that, I think many people are experiencing that. And for some of us, it's worse than for others. And, the people who actually are truly vain, I think they're probably working at their physiques pretty hard. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and like for some of us, it takes more work. And I'm so glad you started seeing somebody and talking about this and cutting yourself some slack, because I think that's important too. I think that somebody who's 500 pounds has a decent road in front of them of diligence and consistency, right? And building habits and all of that. But at the same time, I think that aspect of whatever they're dealing with doesn't have to be forever. And that there should come a point where they get to where you're at, where it's like, okay, a slice of pizza is not going to end my life. I've lost hundreds of pounds. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I just wish that pizza and ice cream and all that stuff, um, didn't contain a lot of the stuff that it contains, so that it wouldn't change your weight that much when you woke up in the morning. Because I would eat like a couple slices of pizza, which probably was only like 800 calories, right? And then I would get up in the morning and I'd be like 10 pounds heavier, and I'd be like, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah.
what the hell did I do? Right. And of course, then your mind starts to go to, well, wait, did I really gain 10 pounds? Or, I mean, I know that it said 800 calories, but why is the scale up? And then you start to believe that will actually contribute to that much weight gain. And what you don't understand is it contains tons of, salt and, fat and all this stuff that can bloat you. Right. And carbs and stuff like that. And especially for somebody who doesn't eat carbs, or wasn't eating a lot of carbs, I should say, back in the day.
Right. Your muscles are sucking up that glycogen, right? It's like probably developed zero fat from the pizza at all, but your muscles are full and like so happy with the carbs, you know?
Yeah, but I'm glad that we're talking about this, because I think a lot of people, they struggle with looking for that thing to come and like fix them,
Yeah.
and I know you've been there. I've been there. I think a lot of people obviously have, in that, you know, I thought that in order for me to be liked by people, and to be able to get a girlfriend, or to be able to like be valued by people, that I needed to look a certain way. Um, and I started to do stuff for other people. I started to seek validation because I wanted to get the approval from others, not because I wanted it to do it myself. It was more for other people. And then you end up getting lost, and you end up losing track of who you really are and what you actually like value about yourself and what you want to do in your life.
Yeah, and I would suspect that the majority of the people that we're talking about or talking to who have whether it's body dysmorphia or legitimate things about their body that they want to change that are changeable, they don't consider themselves who they are to be based on the worth of their body, right? And so this idea that you are going to therefore have more value because you change your body, it's just like a silly thing. Like I'm the exact same way. I always thought as a kid, like a girl could love me if she just got to know me, but they'll never get to know me because I have this body that I have. So I have to get a good body in order for a girl to love me. It's just nonsense.
Yeah. And the problem is, like, I think a lot of times when we're in those situations, like when we don't love ourselves, or we don't trust ourselves, or whatever the example is, it's hard for other people to do the same with us. Right. And so I found that to be the case, like, again, around the same time, where I was still dealing with a lot of the darkness from my past. I mean, sure, I had stayed away from the drugs I was abusing. Sure, I had, built a career out of what happened to me in jail. Like, all that stuff was true, but I still hadn't forgiven myself for what I had done in the past. I still hadn't forgiven my parents. Like, I had so much resentment towards my mom for kicking me out when I was 16, when she caught me with weed. I had resentment towards her and what I felt like she wasn't there for me when I needed her the most. Now, again, like, looking back now, it's like, her and I have a great relationship, and I know she was doing the best she could with the tools that she had. Because, I tell people, like, people have to remember, like, this is nearly 20 years ago when she kicked me out. Like, mental health, addiction, like, all this stuff wasn't talked about like it is now. Now it's front and center, I would say, of most everybody's minds. And so I had resentment towards her for that. I had resentment towards her for, even when I got out of jail initially, I felt like she still wasn't like believing me, right? Because as addicts, it's like we could screw up for 10 years, and the minute we're clean or sober, whatever you are, for 10 days, we expect everybody to fully trust us again, right? And it's just
Well,
not
yeah, and don't you think we also spend a lot of times lying to
yeah.
people in the build up to that? Like I know from when I was an addict and dealing with addicts today, which isn't super common, but it happens. Like a person who hasn't really gotten some sober time under their belt, they're just liars.
Right.
They're lying. They're first lying to themselves, because I think they're actually, what they're saying to you, they believe, but you just can't. I just take it with a grain of salt. You know, like somebody who's 7 days sober, who's trying to tell me they figured it all out and they're fine now, and like they're doing great. Give them all the responsibility and trust back that you would to somebody who never had those problems. I'm keeping them at arm's length, because I think it takes a while to really build that foundation of responsibility.
100%. And I think that when people are like just yearning for that instant validation from family and friends right away, it's like there's still work to do, that to know that, you know, they shouldn't expect anything from anybody, and that if they're looking for validation right away, that it's like, all right, like, how are you truly feeling about yourself and where you're going? Because you're trying to convince somebody that your life is fully turned around, when a logical person would say there's no way, right? It's been 3 days or 3 weeks or whatever. And so what it forced me to really do, as far as my mom, is I knew that there was nothing I could personally do to make her like me or or show love in a certain way. Nothing. The only thing I could do is work on my side of the street, right? And make sure that I was doing everything that I possibly could every single day to improve myself, to improve my life, to improve the way I manage stress, to improve the way I communicated with people, to be able to get to a place where when she was ready, we were able to come and have a conversation that, you know, was transformative in our relationship, where we essentially sat down over dinner one night and we were just talking, and she was like, you know, is there anything you wish I would have done differently, like with how I handled things? And at that point, I had been, again, working on myself for a bit of time. So it wasn't like, well, you fucked me up, you shouldn't have. It was like, I was like, Mom, you know, I understand you just did like the best you could. I was like, I honestly just wish you would have you would have just asked me, like, why? Like, why am I doing those things? Because deep down, I was really struggling, you know, from the bullying in the school really, really impacted me. I mean, I was, people would, one of my nicknames was Down syndrome Doug in grade school. And so I had started to convince myself that there was something wrong with me, because I was like, why are these kids calling me this? Like, I think I'm pretty smart. Like, I'm not, you know, I didn't think that it made sense, but I'm like, well, maybe I am, right? And so, and there was other things that I was called and stuff, and that made me want to check out, because I was experiencing so much pain. And then, you know, other things like not making the sports teams when I loved sports, and just my family, some of my family relationships that were impacting me. And so, because I was a teenager, and it's like, you're not really taught how to open up and share stuff like that. You know, that was something that I just wish we could have had a better conversation on. And who knows if she'd even asked me that, if I had been willing to share. But, you know, the fact that she asked me what she could have done differently, then I'm like coming to her and being like, you know, here's what I would have done differently. And then you're
Yeah.
able to say, because it's like, what I've learned is, you know, I was ready to say I was sorry and I have to forgive my mom for a long time. But I feel like we wait until the other person does it first. And it's like, as soon as they do it, then it's like, whoa, yeah, I'm sorry too. Right. Um, and so that was something that really helped me let go of a lot of the painful moments of my past, was knowing that I could have a decent relationship with my mom again. And with my dad and I, you know, we've never really seen eye to eye, specifically when I was younger. And it just got to the point where, you know, I love my dad. And I think that without him, I wouldn't, you know, be where I'm at today. It's because it's like what I haven't valued in relationships when I was a kid, I now have learned like what I actually want and don't want when I get older. And I've just learned to just accept him for who he is, and then just have the best relationship I can. Because before, I just would resent him and I was filled with deep anger, but it took a lot of work and therapy and learning to forgive him. And then also know that, like, I'm also flawed, right? In that I'm a hypocrite if I'm expecting people to forgive me if I continue to mess up or I do things out of character, but yet I'm not willing to do the same for other people. So all of that was stuff that became very helpful in me coming to terms with a lot of stuff that happened to me in my past.
Yeah. I mean, I think like, you know, I wanted sobriety to fix me. I wanted a diet to fix me. I expected many times for all of my issues to be resolved by taking part in some other thing. And then, you know, I think there's some sense of peace in going like, I'm a work in progress forever, you know,
Yeah.
like this is not, whatever's going on might get better, but I don't think it's ever going to go away completely. Or it's going to constantly take some kind of work or effort or something like that. And I think that that's really powerful to be able to go back and forgive people, you know, and have those conversations are super helpful. I think that contributes to personal growth quite a bit.
It does, because like you begin to, once you understand the process of forgiveness, and like you said, that we're this continuous work of progress, you begin to accept the fact that none of us are perfect. And I think we're all doing the best we can most of the time with like the tools we have, the level of self-awareness we have, the level of self-esteem that we have. And you just learn to understand people more,
Yeah.
you know?
It was really profound when I became a parent. And there was a point, you know, it wasn't when my kids were babies, but when you start to recognize that this thing that you consider has been entirely of your shaping, right? You're first of all, it's your progeny. Biologically, you've contributed to creating it, and then through your actions and behaviors, you've contributed to its upbringing, and so there's this idea like it's my thing that like, you know, almost like if you were doing a drawing or something, right? And you're like, wait a second, this drawing is drawing itself also. And there was a point where I had to go like, oh, my kids are also human beings and people, and their ideas and ideals are not going to sync up with mine perfectly. That I was also able in that moment to apply that to my parents, because I never really thought of my parents as human beings. They were my parents. Um, and I held a lot of, I think, animosity towards certain things that they had done to me. And if I looked at what I considered they had done to me through the lens of parents trying to raise kids, it became a lot easier for me to go like, oh, I get it. No, I get it. They did the best they could as people with kids from their point of view, from their perspective. They were doing what they were supposed to do. And that doesn't mean that that's how I have to do it. And that doesn't mean that the way I do it is the way my kids have to do it. Because again, I'm a person separate from my parents, and my kids are people separate from me also. I don't know. It was a lot for me to bestow humanity upon my parents. You know what I mean? And go like, beyond just my parents, you're people, and people have all kinds of shit going on that's imperfect. There's no perfect person.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think that, so many times, especially I think when I started to do personal development, for instance, and I started to get into health and fitness, I assumed that everybody else should behave like me. I believe that everybody else should be going to therapy. Everybody else should be like working on their level of self-awareness and all these other things that happens when you like embark on that journey. And the reality is like, there's a lot of people that's just not going to be what they want to do. And that's okay. Right. And that we're all different, and we all have different interests, and we all have different things that make us tick. And it also, as I like got further down the path, I realized that everybody's human, and we all make mistakes, and there's plenty of things that I did in my past and the way I treated other people that um I would be so embarrassed to say some of the things that I did. And so if I'm saying that, then how can I, you know, judge somebody else for some of the mistakes that they made in their past? And I just think that the more you understand that we're all human and that we're all doing the best you can, the more you begin to not only understand how to forgive somebody, but to not take things so personally.
Yeah. Yeah, the wildest thing as a parent again, and this also comes through being a sober person who has had many conversations with many other sober people, is like, man, I can think of the worst shit that I've done that is completely embarrassing and makes me feel like I'm an unforgivable person. And then I can have a conversation with somebody where they are able to take that in, digest it, and go, wow, here's what I got, and then tell me a story that's even worse, right? And so, with my kids, I'm just like, listen, I want open communication.
Mm.
There's nothing you can tell me that is going to, I suppose somebody could come home, one of my daughters could come home and tell me, like, by the way, I'm in a gang and I just did a drive-by shooting, and I might fall out of my chair with shock. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, I don't really foresee that happening. And so within the realm of what's going on with typical adolescence, I'm like, I was also an adolescent. I also did crazy shit. And like, I'm not going to react in a crazy way. Like, that's the other thing. Like, the day I realized that my father had also been an 18-year-old guy with all the shit that 18-year-old guys do, he had always just been this figure for me that was like beyond reproach. He went to work, he never drank. Um, he was decent and moral, and like, you didn't fuck with him. You know what I mean? You got in big trouble if you didn't follow the rules. And so like a guy like that, I couldn't picture also having broken rules as a kid. I couldn't picture him as a kid. And so when my kids have anything, it's really an interesting conversation of going like, hey, I'm not going to judge you and get mad at you and tell you you're a bad person. Like, let's just have a conversation as two people. What's going on, and what are your thoughts, and where do you feel you fucked up that I can possibly help you with without just making you feel like garbage, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's really cool that you've been able to develop this level of like awareness and just understanding around parenting, around kids, so that you can acknowledge like how your father was, but then also in the same conversation know like certain things that you might do differently, right, with your kids. And I think that's an important place to be, where you can, I mean, because a lot of times what happens is there's two extremes. There's the sole blaming of the parents, right? And then that becomes like an excuse for other behavior in the future. Or there's like the other side where it's like, well, I'm just gonna do what my parents did because that's just the way that I'm wired, right? And I think two things can be true. I think that you can acknowledge that your parents acted a certain way, and that probably did, contribute to your wiring and conditioning, whatever you would call it. But you can also change and do things differently while also understanding that however you were raised, your parents were human.
Yeah, it was for me, especially in relation to my kids. There was a struggle because for a long time, and to your point where you talked about like you were making progress with therapy and having a diet in place and an exercise routine, and everybody should just do that. And I felt much the same way. There were diets where I was like, you know, people should not be eating gluten. Gluten is poisoning America. I think I read like Grain Brain when it came out, and it became this big thing with me of like, this is what's the bane of, Western societal addiction to grains and processed foods. And, you know, there was this idea of what my kids should be, how they should think. I had very kind of stringent ideas about right and wrong. And I had to give that up, man. I had to give up this sense of like, what is right for me is not necessarily right for everyone. but like my desire would be for everyone to find their sense of right and wrong and live in that way, which I think is more important than everyone adhering to what I find to be right and wrong. Because at the end of the day, people drink and it's not a problem for them. People go to McDonald's and it's not a problem for them. And if it's not a problem for them, I don't need to make it a problem for them. Do you know what I mean? Like
100%.
what what has been a problem for me is not necessarily going to be a problem for my kids. You okay?
Hold on, my dog's barking. Hold on.
Okay.
Sorry, my neighbor must have walked in.
No, it's all good. I got dogs too. They can be quite a racket sometimes. Anyway, um I'm trying still to like it almost got to the point where I turned everything into like flavors of ice cream. You know, like am I going to be mad at my kid if she prefers chocolate to French vanilla? I'm not going to be mad at her. She's allowed to prefer whatever flavor of chocolate she likes. And so I would take that out. And, you know, obviously there's extremes. If my kid came to me and tried to sell me on cannibalism and why cannibalism is right for her, I would have to have a serious talk with her like that. I would go like, well, there's going to be a lot of problems with wanting to eat people, right? But like, if you take it down into the normal everyday stuff, there's going to be a lot we disagree on. And I can't be absolutely right about any of that for them. I can only figure out what's true and right for me and try to live a moral life based on that, set a good example for them, and then hope for the best and expect that they're going to be different people. And then I apply that to my parents too and go like, God, a lot of my strife in life came from this idea that people were not behaving in the way I wanted them to behave. And really, I think it was really mostly that I wasn't behaving in the way that was appropriate for me to behave.
Yeah. There's so much there that, and it all makes so much sense because I think that what you just said is so true. It's like when we're not happy with ourselves, we look for people to point the finger at, right? Because it just makes us feel better about ourselves. Like, again, going back to what we talked about, like towards the beginning of our conversation, like when we're feeling like low about ourselves, it's hard to like look in the mirror and say, you know what, like I got something I need to fix. It's easy to say, you know what, well, that person's doing that, that person's doing that, so I guess I'm okay. And I had a similar shift where, you know, you talked about that everybody should cut out gluten and everybody should diet a certain way. As a personal trainer, I think every the moment where a trainer goes from like good to great is the moment where they really stop assuming that everybody else has the same like lifestyle and schedule and level of discipline that they may have. Because early in my career, you know, I would get parents with like 4 kids, and you'll appreciate this. And I'd be like, just get up earlier, get up at 4, make the time. Like, what are you doing? Like, health as well, like all this stuff. And then I realized, like, the more I trained people with kids, and I was like, man, their schedule is kind of overwhelming. I mean, they're taking them to
A lot,
you
yeah.
know, 4 different practices. They're, you know, sleepless nights. They got to make dinner, and they got to do this, they got to do that. And so then it became, all right, how can I effectively help them just fit fitness into their schedule? Right. Because them being consistent is much better. Even them being consistent with just working out a few days a week it's much better than them being erratic and, you know, working out a week straight and then not working out for a few weeks or a month. And I say that because it kind of goes in line with what we're saying, in that not everybody is going to be like you,
Right.
right? Not everybody's going to have that same passion for different things, and that's okay. And so I think it's important to, you know, obviously understand what makes you tick and what's important to you, while also like trying to spend time with people that, you know, you also may not always agree with, that might have different opinions than you, that maybe have different lifestyle habits than you or whatever. Because that then you learn from them, they learn from you. And it's not to say that you know, you should hang out with people that are treating you a certain way. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I think that we live in this world where we expect everybody to be like us, and that we're the way we are is the way that everybody else should be. And it's just so far from the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, again, I think it goes back to that what you were talking about in the beginning with the personal responsibility. Like the minute we give the power to somebody else, we take the power away from us. And I do think it's a tough sell to assume that a guy who's 500 pounds, sedentary, subsisting on just almost strictly processed foods, you know, like maybe on the cheeseburger there's some lettuce, and so you can say like, okay, well that's a step in the right direction. Um, to say that it is entirely up to you, you know, I almost want them to come to that understanding very slowly, right? Because you can take that point of view, because it is just a point of view. There's no truth to it more than just a way of looking at the world. Um, and you can go too hard in the paint and get onto some really unsustainable program, and just go like, it's all up to me. So now every day I've got to kill myself in physical activity. I've got to starve myself of food, and I've got to experience this pain. And it's like, that might not, you might not get very far doing that, right? And so I think there's like a almost a progressively a steady way to get to there that is more than just shut up bitch, which I understand worked for you in that moment, but I doubt that in that moment you overcame everything.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, overcoming everything takes some time. It's slow, it's gradual, but I think that that kind of shift can be as much as shut up bitch. Like, I love when David Goggins says shut up bitch to himself, right? Like, his telling his inner bitch to shut up. I love that. That doesn't mean that I can run 100 miles today. I can't. I can't run 3 miles today. I can't run. I can barely run across my yard, but I could do cardio for an hour and a half. You know, I could get my heart rate up to 150 and keep it there for an hour and a half, but I can't really run. And so I'm going to keep, you know, if I want to run, it's going to be this slow and steady progressive thing that I work towards. So I really like shut up bitch, but I think that for a guy who is morbidly obese and maybe even addicted to some drugs, and I think shut up bitch could be like, shut up bitch, I'm going to walk to the end of my driveway today, and then shut up bitch, I'm going to walk to the street tomorrow, and then shut up bitch, I'm going to walk to the corner the day after that. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be, you know, I'm responsible for the entire universe on day one and I can do anything.
Right. Well, I think, you know, the underlying message of the conversation with my cellmate in jail was what was most important. Like the language, obviously being called a, you know, a bitch in jail, or being called a bitch in general, is like something you don't want to be called.
Right.
Right. And also it was at a time where I had started to understand that whatever I was doing in my life wasn't working. And I really, for some reason, this guy had what I had. I mean, he was in jail. Not that I really wanted that, but he had this physique. He was ripped. I mean, he was in great shape, and I wanted that. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to listen to whatever this guy tells me to do. And, um, and so, you know, I started to understand that, yes, this was my responsibility and my fault. And that has been the, um, underlying theme of my own internal messaging when I go through hard times, or when the pandemic happened or whatever, where it's like, it's not shut up, bitch. It's like, dude, nobody's coming to rescue you. Like, you have to take full responsibility for this. You can't blame the government. You can't blame this. You can't blame that. Like, that's not going to work anymore. Like, you have to take full responsibility for where you're going. And I think that having that back up against the wall mentality, which was built when I was in jail, has really served me, because when I hit adversity, you know, I don't curl up in a ball. You know, I may take some time to process it, but then it's like, all right, how can I take action to like find a way to make my situation better? But it's also had a negative effect, because I also, even when things are good, I still feel like my back's up against the wall, even if that makes sense, to where I still feel like I have to push and do the next thing and do the next thing, when really the best thing to do in that moment is just to chill and just like celebrate like where I've come. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh no, it totally does. No, I think I think that that's right. I think, it's hard for, before you've made a lot of progress, it's hard to be responsible for everything in the past. That's
Sure.
hard. But I think that the point of view that I think is necessary is I have to be responsible for everything in the future. And
Right.
that's easier. And once you get there, then you can start applying it to the past. Then it's kind of easy to look back and go like, "Oh, I caused that and I caused this." Once you've once you've taken ownership of moving forward, made progress, seen what you're capable of, it's easy to look back and go like, "No, I fucked that situation up too, and here's how." But I do think the better step isn't like, you're 500 pounds, you caused it, you need to take ownership of having caused it. I don't think that's as valuable as, you need to take ownership of everything moving forward. I think that is a more valuable piece, right? Who fucking cares about the past? We're not existing in the past. We're existing in the present and looking towards the future. So own that, period. And if you want to look back at the past and own that later, fine. Who cares? But like, you can't really change what happened in the past. You can change how you look at it. And that might affect the way you move forward.
Yeah. There's so much gold there. And I think one of the things that helped me with that was, I think as addicts, we get focused on instant gratification. So for me, like I wanted to, lose all the weight and get ripped as fast as possible. But like really before my journey started in jail from a health and fitness perspective, I was talking to Eric and I was like, how long is it going to take me to like get ripped? And he's like, how long you been fucking up your body? I'm like, a long time. He's like, it's going to take a long time, Doug. And so it made me realize that like it wasn't going to happen overnight, but I knew that I had a target. And for me, what helped was I had like a vision of who I wanted to be, and not in any kind of like woo woo way. I just knew that I wanted to be fit. I wanted to have a better level of self-esteem. And I knew that if I did certain things every single day, that it would give me a chance to become that person. It wasn't going to guarantee that I would be there, but it gave me a chance. And so I would build off of those small wins early on. I would build off of, doing the one push-up for my knees and doing the one push-up for my feet and doing sets of push-ups and stuff like that. And then that gave me the confidence to keep going, right? And that gave me also understanding of what I needed to do to keep the progress going, because I saw what was working for me. I knew that I had to get a certain number of steps in. I knew I had to do, calisthenics. I had to eat a certain way. And I think what people don't realize is they're looking to go from like couch to 5K in a matter of seconds and thinking that's going to be the thing that builds their self-confidence. And what I've experienced, and I know like a lot of other people have experienced from making these big transformations, is I find the biggest levels of confidence come from like going from 0 to 1, 0
Yeah.
to 2. It's like getting yourself out of a place where your life feels so dark or you feel so defeated, and just having the courage to get up and start moving again.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself is like one of the biggest levers you can pull to build confidence.
No, I totally agree. And for anyone out there whose goal is a 5K, get ready to set another goal right when you finish the 5K. Like as you're crossing the finish line, get ready to fucking start something new, because if you don't want to go back to what you were doing before you started your 5K goal, like that's like, for me, I want to have new goals all the time. I want to be constantly making goals, or just I get static and I start to relapse, and revert. And it's like, that's not fun. I do have a question that I'm dying to ask you, which is, within the structure of jail with Eric, like, by the way, fucking thank God for Eric. I feel like what a great celly to have. You know what I mean? Like you're working out with this Adonis. Um, I understand leaving would have terrified me to no end. What did you do? What was your program? What was your mindset? How did you act in the real, quote unquote, real world once all those confines were lifted?
It was tough, man, because, you know, going to like when I got out of jail. So when I went to court, first of all, my sentence was, um, I went to court in September 30th of 2008. He said the judge sentenced me to 5 years, everything suspended but 90 days, meaning if I messed up, I could have potentially gone back and done the full 5 years. 5 years probation, 200 hours of community service, all kinds of fines. But he also sentenced me to drug classes. So that to me was like my outpatient treatment. Like I didn't go to AA, I didn't go to NA. Not that I was ever against that. That wasn't my part of my path. Like I just knew that I got out of jail. I was going to move in with my grandparents, who have been very instrumental in my life and in my transformation. And they gave me some great structure. They gave me this level of love with also accountability. And what they did was they're like, hey, you can move in here. You don't have to pay rent. We'll pay for your food. We'll give you spending money. But here's the deal. You're going to bring us receipts for any money we give you. And if it doesn't match up with what you told us it's for, you're out. You're going to come home at a certain time. You're going to work to get a job. You're going to work out. You're going to do all the things that they knew was going to help me change. But if I didn't follow those things, it was going to result in me not being able to live there anymore. Had that in place, had the outpatient like drug rehab where it's just kind of like you go to like a class a few days a week, you got to pass drug tests. And I don't know if it was a few days a week or once, I forget what it was, but something where, you know, you go and you would sit like similar, I'm sure, in like treatment and talk about like addiction and stuff. So that gave me another level of accountability. And then being on probation, where you're having to report to a probation officer, was another added level of accountability, because I was mortified of going back to jail. So I was like the guy that just kind of did everything I needed to do from that perspective and made sure that I was in compliance with parole and probation. As far as like dealing with a lot of the emotional stuff that I hadn't really learned to deal with outside of jail, like I mentioned, you know, before, I was always escaping. In jail, I was thankful enough that I was in there a long enough time that I was able to reestablish behavior to emotion, to where I got used to, if I got angry, I would work out. If I got upset, I would work out, or I'd journal, or I'd run, or whatever the case may be. So that when I got out, when I still was overwhelmed with stress, uncertainty, fear, I would find ways to exercise. And that became actually a great way for me to process some of the pain, where when I would run, I would like think about what would make me angry, or I would think about like some of the stuff in my past. I mean, I know like we can't change the past, but there was a lot that I had to process there that I was holding on to for periods of my life. So that was effective. Changing the people that I spent time with was instrumental. I mean, I talk a lot now. I mean, as much as I say you should definitely be having conversations and spending time with people that are different than you, I think you got to, for me, what really helped was spending time with people that had common futures and not common pasts. Because I think what happens to a lot of people is
I
they'll
fucking
say,
love that, by the way. Common futures. That's awesome.
yeah, well, and I think why the reason I think it's important is because a lot of times we'll stay in friendships or in inner circles because we've known that person for 15 years. We partied with that person for 10 years. So we feel some sense of loyalty to a certain friend or a certain friend group. And it wasn't that I felt that these people were inherently bad people. I just knew that the last time I spent a good amount of time with them, I got into some, you know, shady, you know, situations. And the main reason I knew it was time for me to kind of move on from those friend groups was as I got out of jail and I started to make progress in my health and fitness. And, you know, I went from like reading like High Times magazine before I went to jail to now I'm like reading Men's Muscle and Fitness, Men's Health, stuff like that, that I didn't have anything in common with them anymore. So I'd be around them, but it would feel like an awkward first date where they're like going out and getting high and they're like, you want to come? I'm like, no, of course not. And I would just be sitting there like figuring out how I'm going to get my protein in. Right. And so it just got to a point where I was like, man, like, this is just weird. Like it's not even enjoyable for me to be able to spend time with these people. So I started to spend more time alone and hang out with my grandparents at home and watch TV and stuff like that, and learn to work on my inner self and what I actually wanted in certain relationships. You know, being of service has definitely been something that was very helpful for me, where, you know, when I first became a trainer, I found this new high in helping other people use fitness to change their lives in the same way that Eric helped me. So that was important. Spirituality was instrumental, but not until like later on in my life, to where like around the same time I was talking about earlier when I was struggling with the external validation and fitness piece, where I just, people were telling me in my life, they're like, you need something else. Like you need some spirituality in your life, whatever it is, because like you just seems like that part of you is missing. And then having a relationship with God and becoming a Christian was very helpful in me understanding that even though God wasn't, or even though I wasn't proud of what I had done in my past, God was, because he was able to use that to help me transform my life and then to be able to do the work that I was doing to help others. And then that, you know, helped inspire me to improve the relationship with my mom and forgiveness and all that stuff I talked about earlier. And then the other thing, there's so many things, but the last thing I'll say is just this idea that it's up to me, and that if I focused on the version of me, which is why I love the killed my clone thing that you say. It's like if I focused on the version of me that was in the past before jail, and I focused on that and just thought about that the whole time, I would lose, because I would begin to justify certain things, and I would be able to assume that I'm going to be a certain way, and then my actions would start to match the way I thought in my head, and I would end up back down that path, right? But I knew that if I could just do the best that I could every single day to do the exact things I knew I needed to do on that day, whether it was the certain people I needed to stay away from, whether it was certain activities from a health and fitness perspective, you know, certain foods or whatever, that it gave me a chance to become that person I wanted to be. And then it allowed me to become a better version of myself each and every day. And it was super incremental. As far as my relationship with my cellmate, he unfortunately passed away last year, which was really tough for me. Initially, when I got out, we would write letters to each other, and there was times where I got out like in the winter time, and part of my routine in jail was, you know, doing calisthenics and also running. And so in the winter, it was cold, and I didn't feel like running. So I was in one of the letters. I told him, I was like, "Dude, it's cold. I don't feel like running." And he obviously said what I expected him to say, and, you know, said like, "Quit being a bitch," or something to that effect, and being like, you know, I build machines, get out there and buy some sweatpants and go run. And I was just like, okay, you know, and when when I got sweatpants and started running, and we actually ended up meeting up and doing a couple like actual workouts together, where I was actually able to keep up with what he was doing.
Oh,
And it
wow.
was, yeah, which was really cool. And then, you know, he knows that, or he knew that, you know, he helped save my life. I dedicated my first book to him, and he just kind of went down a different path, unfortunately. But I guess the silver lining in him passing away was, I remember the moment he passed, his mom like reached out to me on Facebook and was just like, "Hey, you know, Eric, obviously you knew Eric, my son, really well, and he passed away, and blah blah blah." And, you know, she invited me to come speak at the funeral, and then I had family, like a family member, reach out to me, which was this is honestly one of the coolest things, in that she was like, "You know, I was looking through, and, you know, I was finding out who he was connected to, and I somehow saw your name, and then I saw that you were, you know, were doing podcasts, and then I would listen to them, and I heard you share his story, and it made me happy, because I realized like it got to let me see like the good side of him that we always knew, and I just never knew that doing all of this would lead to that, right?" And I
Yeah.
think that's at the, you know, to tie this all together, it's like that's kind of what this message has been, right? It's like, you know, you don't change everything overnight. You don't have, you know, a 10-year level of success overnight, but it's just taking responsibility for the here and now, and doing everything you can that day, and then the next day doing the same thing and the same thing and the same thing, and then all that stuff starts to stack up, right? And just like bad habits can compound, good habits compound as well.
So beautiful, Doug, and I really appreciate what you're doing, and I'm truly grateful that you're doing what you're doing. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, man, and thank you again for having me on.
Absolutely. I look forward to talking to you soon.
Sounds good, brother.